Good day. Welcome to this video on learning and on teaching. Now, sometimes teaching doesn't always equal learning. We as teachers can teach really hard, can put a lot of effort in, do a lot of prep, and when we deliver, we sometimes find that it just doesn't seem to work. It doesn't seem to, what we want to get through just doesn't seem to get through. Even if it gets through to some students, it doesn't get through to others. I'm sure you've experienced this. So I want to discuss today a model that is very dear to my heart for different reasons. Firstly, this is a thesis that was actually carried out, the research was carried out by my wife, Dr. Almarie Rondewijk, and it's entitled Informing the Facilitation of Mathematics in the Senior Phase Using Hermann's Whole Brain Theory. Now, I encountered Hermann's whole brain theory many years ago when I was doing my teacher's diploma at Rand Afrikaans University. Today it's called the University of Johannesburg. Now, at that stage, I'd never heard of it before. I think it's better known nowadays. I would assume that in many of the teacher training courses around the world that this model is taught to trainee teachers. But at that stage, I'd been teaching for about 2 or 3 years and had been making a lot of mistakes. And I then got the opportunity to go and do a year's teacher training, doing a full-time teacher's course, what they call the postgraduate higher diploma in education. And in this particular course on psychology, educational psychology, I encountered this. And what they did was they tested us. They gave us a very simple test to demonstrate how varied our brain dominancy profiles are. And I was absolutely shocked when I saw the results of my brain dominancy profile. And what it said to me was that the way I thought was not the way that I actually think, and that the way I had been learning was not actually the best way to learn, and hence the way I was teaching wasn't necessarily the best way to teach for all students. Now, with the internet today, you can go and do further research on this. I'm not an expert by any means on it, although I had to read my wife's PhD about 4 or 5 times, so it refreshed my memory on the whole brain learning theory. But in essence, what it is that Hermann took Roger Sperry's idea of the left brain and the right brain, which won Roger Sperry the Nobel Prize for medicine, if my memory serves me correctly. And what he did is he further split it. He took the limbic way of thinking and separated from the higher order cognitive way of thinking and he created 4 quadrants. So in the top left-hand quadrant, what he called the blue quadrant, was the critical way of thinking, logical, highly analytical way of thinking. Then in the lower left quadrant was the green quadrant, was highly organizational thinking. It's that type of thinking where you are in a very structured mode. You have things classified and you have things in order. Then in the bottom right quadrant, the red quadrant, is the emotional social mode, where it's about interpersonal skills, it's about learning with other people, and it's about making links. And then in the top right hand corner is the yellow quadrant, which is that visionary, that person who synthesizes. Now, whenever I explain this to my wife, she often says to me, but Don, you still haven't quite got it right. So I'm going to say to you, please go and do research on it. Go and look at ChatGPT, go and look at Google. But in essence, what remained for me was that we as human beings, the way we think is complex, and some people tend to be more dominant in 1 or 2 quadrants, and others in 3 or 4 quadrants. Now, I personally think that if you are closer to a whole brain thinker and a whole brain teacher where you have a strength in all 4 quadrants, you have a better chance of reaching the children in your class that have got and will have varied brain dominancy. So I always thought that I was very much a logical, organizational thinker. But what the test showed me was that in actual fact, I was more dominant in the red and the yellow quadrant, which is more right brain, than in the left quadrant. And that really, a lot of things fell into place, because when I was studying physics, as much as what I loved physics, it was very clear to me that I just wasn't going to make it as a postgraduate physics student and become a professional physicist. And to be a physicist, to be a really good physicist, your blue quadrant and your yellow quadrants need to be very, very strong. Now, as a teacher, you know, my green quadrant and my blue quadrant, especially as a maths and science teacher, it needs to, it can't be non-existent, and it isn't. But the fact that my strengths lay in quadrants that I thought were more for the artist and the visionary, that made me realize I had to re-look at the way I studied, because I still had to pass the course. And instead of using lists, I then switched to using mind maps, and nowadays I use concept maps. And knowing what my preference, my brain dominancy was, or my profile, has helped me as a teacher. And I would strongly suggest that if you haven't done so already, that you go onto the internet and do it, and it'll teach you, give you a deeper insight about yourself. So one of the conclusions that my wife's research came across was the fact that very often teachers teach, and it's no surprise, according to their brain dominancy profile, and that students tend to respond better to teachers who teach according to their brain dominancy profile. So when you're faced with a class of 25, 30, 35, 40 students, you can be assured that you're going to have children with very varied profiles. And so if you want to reach all of them in a lesson, you actually need to vary your style through the lesson. Now, at Rand Afrikaans University, they use what they call the Eurostensive model. On the one side is the heuristic, which is basically very learner-oriented self-discovery. And on the other side was the ostensive, which is the very much verbal teacher-oriented mode. But they taught us that we needed to move continually in between, and I think that was a very valuable thing that they taught me. And so that's one of the things I've always tried, is to vary my lessons. So to obviously have a very strong logical component to it, organizational component, where you have structured notes, to definitely link with the social side of it through relationship, having one students work in groups, having students have a quick discussion in pairs in trying to solve a problem. And then the yellow, but where does it fit in? You know, what is the relevance? That also links to the red. It's like emotionally, I want to know how this affects me. So I encourage you to look more into it. It is a model. It's not the ultimate model. It's not the only model. But I certainly have found that it certainly got me thinking about the need to adjust my teaching style in such a way that I have a higher chance or probability of reaching the students with various brain dominancies in my class. Now, there's also another aspect, and that's about stress profile. So if you do your test, and it's one of the things my wife did in a PhD thesis, she tested teachers and put them also in a sort of pressure cooker situation, and showed them what their brain dominancy profile was in when they were relaxed and what their brain dominancy profile was like when they were stressed. Now, what came out after many surveys with students is that when students are relaxed, they love the teacher that, makes it interesting and it's fun and links it to the real world and that it's social. But at the end of the day, when they get closer to exams, they go into their stress profile. And more often than not, a lot of students, certainly the ones that were tested in the study, converged on the green quadrant. They wanted things to be highly organized, highly structured. They wanted structure so that it could remove the pressure from them because they were in a stress situation. I know what my stress profile is. As much as what I am red and I am yellow, when I under immense stress, I go very much into green quadrant. Now that isn't easy for people who work around me, and the fact that I'm aware of it is also a good thing because I know the signs of when I'm starting to go that way and go into that quadrant or go too far into that quadrant. And so I encourage you once again, to look at your stress profile, because that will also help you as a teacher if you're working in a department with other teachers. So I tell my colleagues, understand this is my stress profile. When I go into this, understand, but also just maybe say to me, listen, Don, you do know that you're stressing. So that is my message for you today in this video, and I hope it's going to be of value to you. Thank you. Bye-bye.